I don't know if you're like me, but every year I look forward to the latest in the CISO Mind Map. It's out, and I have the author of it here. Stick around. You're going to get some wonderful insights. Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. My name is J. Mark Hardy. I am your host for today, and I have none other than Rafeeq Rehman on the show yet again. I think it's their third year in a row to talk about your work on the CISO Mind Map.
Very good. Thank you, Mark, for giving me another opportunity. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you. This is one of the things that is done on an annual basis, as this is the 15th year of publication of CISO Mind Map. And every year there are some changes, some updates, and some nuances that we talk about. But looking forward to having this conversation.
I am too. So for those who are not familiar with the CISO Mind Map, this is something that you do as a personal initiative, all right? But tell us a little bit about where you are, what you work. I guess you probably don't officially speak for your company, but that's okay. A lot of us have to add that disclaimer. But a little bit of background for people who are not familiar with who you are and where you came from.
Yeah, definitely. That is the disclaimer that we have to make. We speak for ourselves. We don't speak on behalf of our employers or the people we work for or work with. I am in cybersecurity industry for more than 20 years now. It has been a long journey. I happen to be accidentally involved in cybersecurity because I came from electrical and computer engineering background, and an opportunity came up early in 2000s to be in cybersecurity professional, and I took it. And since then, I have been in this industry, and I really like it because there are so many new things that happen every year, and it always keeps you on your toes. New challenges, new opportunities, and new ways of working. I primarily work in cybersecurity, computer networks, and for the last couple of years, like everyone else, doing things related to AI and generative AI especially. So that's what my background is. From education perspective, as I mentioned, I'm coming from electrical and computer engineering background. I have written some 7-8 books published. You can find on Amazon.com. And the CISO Mind Map, it happened. I was not planning for it, other than many people in earlier days of cybersecurity used to ask me about what do you do, and it was not very easy for me to explain to everybody what I do. So I created the initial CISO Mind Map. These are the things that any security professional does on a day-to-day basis. And once I published it, it caught people's eye and they started asking me, and the journey started from there.
Yes, excellent. So yeah, if we think about it, it's changed. And so each year you bring it up to date. That's the important thing, because what we'll find out if you go back to 2012 versus today, a very different set of responsibilities, scope, things that we've added in the last year or two. AI, I know you started to start looking out for AI last year. Now, of course, it's front and center. And who knows, next year might be doing all of our jobs and we will be all looking for their next meal. Probably not. I hope not. But more to the point, I want to say thank you, because you have taken the time to help other people in their career journeys, and you've done this as a contribution to the profession. One of the things I think we find, and part of what I love about having spent a career in cybersecurity, and I'm realizing that, this year I've already clicked the counter into the 40s. I wish it was my age, but no, 40 years plus of doing it, because I first started working at Booz Allen in 1995, so I guess over 40.
Oh, wow.
It's been a long journey. And so, of course, the problem is it's like being a gold prospector in California in 1828. There's nothing out there, and you'll spend a lot of time wandering around and trying to just go hand to mouth and survive. And by the time the land rush comes and all the prospectors show up, you're like, wait a minute, get off of my claim. But we got plenty of room for people. It's great thing is that we've been able to create meaningful careers that are not just monolith. They branch out. They do a lot of different things. And for a lot of people in the technology world, becoming the chief information security officer often can be the peak. Now, I just had an episode that we talked about what comes after the chief information security officer. For those who are interested, go back and listen to this past week's episode. Going forward, I think that for the most of us, we realize that the CISO Mind Map is a very comprehensive list of tasks. And you point out in your article, if you go through that the CISO is not personally responsible for every last item on this list. I think that's what people need to remember is this is not an impossible span of control, as we used to call it in the military, but rather it's an area that we should at least understand who owns it. And you also suggest things like a RACI matrix. We can get into that as we get further into our conversation. But let's talk a little bit about what's changed since the last year. I've seen 4 big things. So what's the first one from your perspective that's a big deal for this current year?
Yeah, just from the mechanics of CISO Mind Map, there are a few things that change every year. And this is just to make sure that everything that I put in CISO Mind Map, it is relevant to the work that people are doing today, not a year in the past or a year in the future. So that is the main reason of making these tweaks and adjustments and some of those changes. So things that have changed in this year's CISO Mind Map is number one, I have removed one category, which is remote work category. It used to be, and it came into being basically during COVID days when everybody had to leave their office and start working from home, and new issues popped up about how to make that workforce enable working remotely and making sure that the place they are working from is secure and so on and so forth. So there are a number of issues that, and actually a number of technologies also that emerged during that time. Now that remote work has become the norm and everybody knows how to handle those situations. So I don't feel like there is a need for keeping that as a separate category. So I have removed that and adjusted some of the things that were remaining in some of the other relevant categories. So that's item number one. Other major thing, the second major thing that has changed is I have made some significant updates in using and securing AI. That is one of the sections in the CISO Mind Map. And this section has been there for the last 3 years now. I knew when we started looking at initial versions of ChatGPT that this is something that is going to be very relevant for not only AI, not only the security professionals, but in general, it is a transformational technology. So we started talking about that about 3 years ago. Then last year we had some updates, and this year I have made many of the updates. As like that, there are a lot of things that are changing in this field on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. New tools are being released, and even the frontier models, they are bringing new versions with new capabilities. So this is a field that is very active and changing very quickly. So I have made some significant changes to reflect what has happened in the past 12 months and to make sure that people think about in a systematic way, not reacting to new development next week or week after that, but in a systematic way. Let's think about how to secure these AI technologies and how to use these technologies for security to making our operations better. So that was the second major thing. The third and fourth, those are smaller changes which are done on a routine basis. I have removed some of the old items, consolidated some of the items that are not as relevant as they used to be at one point in the past and have become routine. And last but not the least, I have made some visual adjustments this year to make it a little bit more readable and visually attractive. Many people who have been looking at the mind map, they would not see a drastic change from that perspective, but as far as colors and some wording and some of the boxes, they definitely add some advantages to just looking at it from a visual perspective. So these are the 4 things that have happened for this release. In addition to that, we will talk about some of the recommendations. So every year I make some recommendations also. So there are some old and some new recommendations that we will talk about.
Yeah, so what we've done then is you said you've removed the remote work category, significant updates to the using and securing AI, consolidating some old items just to go ahead and map this to the current requirements, and then, of course, visual improvements and the like. Now, I've been using mind maps a long time. And so I remember when I did my MBA back in 1997, and the professor introduced it as I recognized that. I'd already been doing it. And I found it's a very great way when I write. I will start out with a piece of paper, put my core idea on there, and then just come up with the major themes. And then I don't have to think linearly. I could just go ahead, drop things onto it. And then when it comes time to write my paper, I just harvest it by just going around the page and pulling off all the topics. And then paper comes together very nicely as compared to sitting down and it was a dark and stormy night and then try to go ahead from that perspective. So for those who are not familiar with the concept of a mind map, I encourage you to take a look at it a little bit more because you'll find out it's a great way to organize your ideas and your details. Now, that said, this could be easily turned into an outline format with A1, A1A, and A1B and things like that. But this way is a little bit more visual appealing because you can look around at certain key elements of it. Now, one of the things that I'd mentioned briefly that I think we want to get to before we dive into some more of the specific recommendations for 2026, 2027, is your concept of a RACI matrix, the responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. So for those who are not familiar with the RACI, or even for those who are, how about a quick review, and then how will that apply to the hundreds of items that we have here on your mind map?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very important point, and I mentioned in the blog post as well that there are so many items in the mind map that sometimes people ask me, am I responsible for everything? And that is a very valid and crucial question because there is no way one team or one CISO organization can handle all of those things. And many of these things are related to the actual work that security professionals do. So, for example, when we're talking about security operations, like running a security operations center or applying security patches from a day-to-day perspective, or threat monitoring and endpoint security and so on and so forth. So there are many of those things that are core responsibilities of security professionals, and they have to do it by themselves. But there are many other areas which are mentioned in the mind map where they are not directly responsible for, and they have to rely on and sometimes collaborate with other people to make sure that those things are taken care of. So, for example, there are areas in compliance. So there are so many regulations depending upon which country and which industry you live in. There are things that other teams have to do. Some software developers have to do things, and the network administrators have to do things to comply with these compliance and audit requirements. In those situations, the responsibility of the security professionals is to provide guidance and is to make sure that those things are done, but not doing it by themselves. So the idea of who is responsible for getting things done and who is accountable to make sure that those things actually are done. And there are people who need to be consulted so that their opinion matters in making decisions. And there are the people who just need to be informed. They just need to know that this thing is happening or this change is being put in place. So that creating that RACI metric is very important for security professionals so that they understand, first of all, for themselves, what are the things that they are responsible for actually doing hands-on, and what are the things where they have to rely on other people to make sure that they provide guidance, but those things are still getting done. So it's as you mentioned, and people can see, this is a long set of responsibilities. And without having an effective RACI metric, it is very hard for one team to make sure that this whole thing is getting done properly. One of the most important things I would say, as you mentioned, get the RACI metric done. It may not be perfect in the beginning, but you can improve it as you go along. And sometimes with organizational changes, you may have to update the RACI metric to corresponding to those changes as well. So keep that as a living document.
And so when we talk about a RACI document, for those who aren't familiar with it, you put your line items on a horizontal, and then you'll have 4 columns: responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. Or more precisely, what you can do, you can also put the roles up there of people that will be involved, like stakeholders, project manager, technical team, etc., and then indicate in that little box, is this person accountable for the result? That is to say, who gets yelled at if it doesn't work out, and ideally who gets the credit for if it works out. Responsibility is who actually does the work. Usually the accountable person is not always the responsible person. You can delegate out that responsibility to get it done, but at the end of the day, the person on the hook for it is accountable for it. Someone who's consulted means you let them know what's going on and you try to get their inputs on it because they're going to have some way of shaping that activity. And the informed means just keep people up to date. They may not have any inputs. They certainly are not going to be driving the thing, but you don't want to be operating in a vacuum where nobody knows what you're doing until finally, after several days or weeks or months of work, ta-da, you come down from the mountain with your work. And that was, of course, what we always complain about the waterfall model, is that you come back and say, here you go. And you're likely you did what we said, but not what we meant. And so you have to go back and redo it and then ta-da, try again. And that brought us all the way over to other things such as faster models and doing things in terms of the software development and ultimately culminating in DevOps and things such as that. So let's take a look Thoughts on that before you go
Just
into like,
just one thing. I just want to add one thing which I have seen sometimes actually creates problem in RACI models. You can have multiple people in all of the columns, but I would advise you must have always one person in the accountable column.
yeah.
If there are multiple people in the accountable column, usually things fall through the cracks and a person saying, oh, this is not my job, it's someone else's job, and so on. So you should always have only one person in the accountable column. And then in other columns, you can have as many people as needed.
That makes very good sense. And of course, it's a good reminder. I know I used to teach that at SANS for a number of years, and that was one of the important things to remember. And probably a test question as well, which of them could only be that. So we'll knock on the podium there. So let's talk about recommendations that are specific for this year and next year going forward. And I think your first one that you provided is embrace and adapt to AI. And so tell me a little bit about what you're thinking here and what people could do.
Yeah, so this is a continuation and a little bit modification to the recommendations that I have been making for, as I mentioned, for the last 3 years. In the previous years, I have recommended when this field was just emerging and just got launched. My recommendation was get to know about this thing, and year after I had, you guys should be understanding and start utilizing these technologies and get yourself familiar and educated about how AI is emerging. But I was a little bit cautious about not making any huge investments in AI about 2 years ago. But now the field has matured to a point where it can be put in production. A lot of people are putting things in production. So this is the time when you need to really embrace AI and adapt AI. It is not something that we as an industry are going to go back on. This is something that is going to be a fact of life going forward for everybody. And whoever is not utilizing AI and not embracing AI fully, I fear that there's a good probability that those people and those organizations may not be able to compete in future. So when we are talking about embracing and adapting AI, there are two main things. I would say two main categories. There are many things, obviously, but two main categories that security professionals should be looking at. The category number one is, because it is such a fast-moving field and a lot of organizations are not only utilizing AI but building applications based upon AI tools and putting those applications into production, which is creating new areas for responsibility for security professionals. So the first major category is that people in cybersecurity, they should be looking at how they can make sure that these applications are building securely, how they can make sure that the data that is being used as a bedrock for those applications and building new intelligence, that data is secure, and that is creating new areas of, for example, DLP that we have been doing for a long term, but this is a new way of thinking about it. Similarly, there are new tools to test these applications. Prompt engineering is an area where vulnerabilities could exist, and people may have heard about prompt injection and so on and so forth, and jailbreaking models. So there are new areas for security professional to understand what are the risks and how they can make sure that they are securing these applications and these new systems. So that's one area. The second major category is that AI is a tool for security professionals themselves to use in many different ways. They can automate many things that they have been doing manually in the past using AI. I am seeing that there are new tools that are emerging in, for example, security operations centers, where tier one jobs that were done many times by people, now the AI tools are intelligent enough that they can use those tier one threat detection and taking actions very effectively. We are actually hearing some talk about there would be autonomous security operations centers in the future and so on and so forth. So there are many ways to use this technology in improving the security work that people are doing. So those are two main areas, and obviously there are many topics. I don't want to go into each and every one of those, but I would recommend that people should be thinking about both of those areas. Number one, how to scale AI and uses of AI in application and so on and so forth, by putting governance around it, by making sure that there are standards and guidelines and there are policies, there are testing procedures, and there are new tools. And secondly, how to use AI to improve the security operations itself.
Now, have you looked at the MITRE Atlas framework and how that might be implemented in that perspective? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are these new standards and new frameworks and new guidelines that are emerging, and people should be thinking about all of those. Actually, I wrote, before publishing this year's CISO Mind Map, I wrote a couple of articles on my blog post about being built by IBM, by Google, and so on and so forth. So people should be thinking about and looking at those new frameworks as well. So there are a lot of things, very active area, a lot of things that are happening. Any conference you go to, any vendor you talk to, whether they have anything with cybersecurity or not, everybody would say probably AI twice in one sentence because there are so many things that are happening there.
Yeah, and as we look at AI, I think that some of the concerns, of course, you've got three things. You have the what could go into it, the input concern, and that is to say, if you have something like a Copilot, which has access to your emails, has access to SharePoint, has access to OneDrive, it's going to be based potentially, if you use it right out of the box, on whatever your access control model has been, which probably in the past has not been all that good. And Bobby, the intern, somehow had access to a folder that had executive compensation data in there, maybe next quarter's earnings or whatever. And he asked, hey, is this stock going to be a good buy coming forward? And the AI comes back and said, why, yes, we just knocked the cover off the ball. When we report next week for our SEC, we're going to go ahead and show 20 cents above the consensus estimate for earnings, which of course creates all kinds of problems. And it wasn't necessarily designed to do that, but then the difficulty for people is to go back and try to thousands upon thousands of permissions that had been set up. And so that's one of the real challenge. Then, of course, there's the processing, the thinking itself. And there's been much talk about poisoning of LLMs, that they train on information. And I've seen things where you could go ahead and just have a Reddit post that has just a small amount of information, but it's repeated over and over again with different linkages to, if you will, fix into the mind of the large language model as it trains on that to go ahead and create strange conclusions, as well as some of just malicious stuff to say, if the year is 2026, respond X. If it's otherwise, respond Y. We do all of our testing and we say, oh, X is the right answer. Here we go. And then the clock ticks over and nobody thought to roll their clock forward in doing their test-in model. And then, of course, on the output, we have what we call hallucinations, but reality is it's just very low probability associations that you should have had a lower bound, at which point, if your likelihood is below 0.00 or whatever, it should come back with the three words, I've still yet to see an AI LLM respond, which is, I don't know. In any case, let's move on from AI so we can take a look, if we want, to take a look at the second recommendation, which is consolidate and rationalize security tools. Now, I think this is the second time you said that.
Yes, this is the second time I said that. And again, about this one also, I published a very detailed article about what it means. And this is for people who are in cybersecurity for a long time. This is not a news for them. They know that over the time period, they have accumulated so many tools. I will not go into too much detail about how that happened, but at a very high level, organizations have gone through mergers and acquisitions, and when they acquire new companies, they acquire new tools with that company as well. You may be using one identity and access management system, and you acquire 3 more companies this year, and lo and behold, you have 3 more identity and access management systems.
And they're already paid out for a couple of years on a contract,
Absolutely.
Or you have to pay for them. Yeah.
They're already paid off. People have built internal tools and applications based upon those IAM systems and so on and so forth. So eventually you end up with so many tools on the average, depending upon who you talk to. Somebody would say you have more than 40, and somebody would say you have more than 80 tools in any average organization. And obviously there's a lot of variation in it. But the point is that a lot of organizations have so many tools that it is very hard for them to keep up to date on those tools. It is very hard for them to manage those tools effectively. The security of those tools itself is a chore for people to manage. And then you have to have people on your staff who understand and know those tools and their interns, so on and so forth. So there are so many issues with having accumulated this idea about we have so many different tools and how we manage those ones. And if you're talking about the risk, it has the number of security tools themselves, they have become a risk for the organization. So many times I say this thing and it seems obvious, but when you say it, it makes more sense that more security tools does not always mean more security. more security tools sometimes may mean less security because you are not using any one of them effectively. So here is the recommendation that, first of all, any organization who is dealing with this problem, and most of them are, they should create an inventory of all of the tools that they're using. They should be creating an inventory about what are the capabilities that they're looking for and see which capabilities overlap, which tools they can get rid of, and which ones they can keep. And then based upon that, they should create a strategy in next 12 months, 18 months, how they are going to reduce number of tools, which is going to help them a lot in many ways. Number one, they're going to save money. Number two, they are going to be worried about less number of tools. Number three, they are not going to be collecting one kind of data from one tool and using a spreadsheet to merge that data with from some other tool and so on. So creating dashboards, reports, and anything else is going to be much more easier. So there are a lot of benefits. I would strongly recommend for people to look into this area. It is just going to help not only improve their operation, but improve the security itself and save money and so on and so forth.
Oh, wonderful. And that's a very good point, because I think that every year I go through, as a CISO, a review of what we have. And then sometimes some vendors expand the scope of what they're doing, and you realize that before you had two tools to do two separate functions, but now there's significant overlap. So think like the old Venn diagrams, if you will. It's to have full coverage. In fact, I would say it's probably important to have slightly overlapping coverage. You don't want to have seams in the armor that attackers or problems could get through. But at the same time, we do have a requirement to meet that cost effectiveness. And of course, my partner, Ross Young, has published his first book on cybersecurity's dirty secret, Why Most Budgets Go to Waste. And I would strongly encourage that book for anybody who has not yet read it. You can probably find a link on the CISO Tradecraft website. But more importantly, we recognize that we have a fiduciary obligation to our organizations to make these good decisions. And Ross had a post about a week ago, and I decided to play devil's advocate. We agreed on this in advance, where he was out and saying that, look, all these AI models are going to be spending all this money, so why not use, instead of a frontier model, a local model, something inexpensive? You could save 60, 80, 90% off of your budget and still get the same job done, essentially, and therefore all that money is saved. My counter argument that I used was basically, if you think of Moore's Law as doubling our processing speed every 18 months, and that's been around since, 1960, an AI with a 3-month cycle or less for doubling of the capability. So in 18 months, you could go 2, 4, 8, 16, 30. And so now you're running at 3% of what your competition is running at if they have the latest high-end expensive frontier model and you're trying to get by with homegrown equipment, those local models. Now, if you're just using it to write proposals and to go ahead and spell check and do basic coding, that's fine. But if you are potentially in a highly competitive environment where a huge capability lead in AI is going to cause your competition to eat your lunch and your dinner and tomorrow's breakfast, you're not going to skimp on your token budget. You're not going to say, hey, everybody, let's save on our travel budget. Everybody take a Greyhound bus and eat out of the dumpster behind the Walmart at night, and then we can cut our budget that way. No, you don't run a business that way. So we'll see how things progress. But my thought is that after these major companies IPO, there's going to be a strong pressure on them to increase their prices, because for $20 or $200 a month, you can spend hundreds or thousands of dollars of compute time, and that money has to come from somewhere, and pretty soon it's going to come from the organizations that are doing it. Let's roll on to recommendation 3, and a very important caveat is we like to talk about AI, and I've had a lot of episodes on, not necessarily because that's really what I said, I can't come up with anything better, but it's changing so fast. But as you point out correctly, the old threats have not disappeared.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we have to make sure that this idea of the fundamentals of cybersecurity should not be forgotten. As I mentioned, ransomware is still there. It is happening. AI or not AI, it is still going to be there. People still have web applications and mobile applications, and those applications are still being exploited, and those are the entry vectors for many of the attacks that are still happening to date. So it's not the AI only on which we should be spending like 90% of our attention. The fundamentals are still there. People are still looking at how they can exploit the old vulnerabilities. If you look at which vulnerabilities are being exploited from different organizations, and there are a number of reports out there, some vulnerabilities are like 10 years old and they're still being exploited. So we should always keep in mind that while we are looking into this fast moving area of AI, all of the fundamentals, they stay the same. Even with AI, I would argue that some of those fundamentals have become even more important. As an example, LP is not something new, data loss prevention and data and so on. It has been happening for a long time. Its importance has actually increased in AI because now we have the agents who are data hungry, and you have to make everything available to them to work better and faster and more accurately. So agents have become the super user or super employee who has access to everything else, and that is very much related to DLP. So we need to take care of that. Risk management. There are things that are basic risk management principles. We used to think about the availability of different systems. Now you have to think about the availability of AI systems and the models that different companies are providing you on which you are building your applications. As we all know, that there are governmental regulations, and there is a new risk that you may be building application and all of a sudden a language model may become unavailable to you. You may be hosting data in a third country, and the government over there may shut down access to that data center or cloud or whatever. So there are new ways of thinking about risk management. So all the point is that cybersecurity professionals should always keep in mind the fundamental principles that we have been working all along, and make sure that those fundamental principles are applied in the case of AI or for any new technology that comes in the future, quantum computing or whatever. So that fundamentals principles, they still exist and they are valid.
And so we saw, for example, when the White House had issued almost like a cease and desist order for Fable and for Mythos, and within 90 minutes it was taken down. There wasn't enough time for it to be up there that organizations have built dependencies upon it. But if we get to the point where they are, and now we find out that access to LLMs becomes a tool of geopolitics, it really changes the equation. And so back over to Ross's argument about these frontier models are going to be very expensive. You want something less expensive. With that less expensive, particularly if it's a local model, is you have control over that availability. Now, the other problems are still there with respect to, could the model be trained incorrectly? Could it still hallucinate? But to a large extent, you've eliminated the data leakage problem from a DLP, because if everything is still contained, sure, it might overtrain. All of a sudden, it can see too much. The only trick is you want to make sure that it doesn't tell, if you will, Bobby the intern things it shouldn't. It's not going to be that third party who goes ahead and gets it and pops it. And so I think what we'll find then is that needs to be focused into your equation. And everybody's all gung-ho and said, yep, we're going to go with this thing. You just say, what happens if that shuts down? And it's not because they go out of business. It's because the government shut it down and we can't get access to it. And you've already let go of all your development staff, and you've already cut your headcount, and you've already gone ahead and made critical business processes utterly dependent upon this external AI tool. And it's cloud computing all over again, if we think about it, because I've seen when Amazon had problems, wait a minute, my mattress, I can't make the temperature change.
Exactly.
So we'll have a new set of risks there. In the time we have available, let's go ahead and recommendation 4, which is take good care of your teams, which sounds like a really good leadership lesson or direction anyway, but can you be a little bit more specific?
Yeah, this is not anything new. This is, as you said very well, that this is a leadership lesson. This is the fundamental responsibility of any person who is leading organizations or who is leading people, that they should be taking care of their people. But I am emphasizing this in the context of AI and the predictions that are being made and the news that we hear all everywhere, that there are going to be drastic job cuts and people are going to lose their livelihood, and who knows which new technology comes in and reduction of force and whatnot. Cybersecurity people, they already worked under stress because they had no idea about when a new threat is going to come, when there is going to be a new data breach, and they were working already a stressed life. And this new idea about losing their job and livelihood and other changes in the organization that is adding to their stress. So that is one of the biggest reasons I am emphasizing it and making it one of the 4 recommendations this year, that anybody who is in a role of CISO, or for that matter, any leadership role in organizations, they should be thinking more about the health and well-being of the people who work for them, and making sure that their concerns are listened to and that they are addressed in a proper manner, and they're provided support when they need to get support, and so on. So it's something that is not like really new or not new for cybersecurity. It is just emphasizing something we already knew in this new context where people have new worries that they didn't have in the past.
It's very good insight, particularly because there's a lot of concern about job stability. And I read posts from peers and some friends that are up on LinkedIn saying, hey, my job just went away, or I was unexpectedly let go, and it was quote unquote a riff or a layoff or whatever. But the reality is that some organizations are looking at, hey, AI is cheaper than people. Maybe it is temporarily, but as we get into the costs, when these token budgets start to normalize toward the actual consumption cost, we realize the impact of what happens when you don't have human supervision for the output and the process that AI does. And quite honestly, it's going to create a big hole in our career pipeline where if you cut off the source within 2, 3, 4 years, when you get to the point, unless AI can race ahead of the human ability to get all the way up to the CEO and the chairman of the board or beyond, there's going to be a point at which point we're going to say, wait a minute, we never developed our next generation of talent. And so allowing our people to, A, develop their skills and talents, B, understand that there is some mental health as well as physical health issues involved in a highly stressful environment. And although we can't make up things, we shouldn't be promising unicorns and rainbows to everybody. I think honesty goes a long way. And if we have a sense of where the organization is going, and not just speculation, but realize that, hey, in 6 months, a year, we're going to be cutting back or whatever, people need to know that. If they have a little bit of ramp-up time, if there's a trust there. Now, if you have a total breach of trust between management and employees as compared to a trustworthy relationship between a true leader and the people who are in that organization, then they're just going to go ahead and default to the Monday morning, don't come into work. But for those of us who are leaders and understand that we've built a relationship and we know people can be trustworthy and counted upon, and even if you're required to let them go immediately once they give their 2 weeks notice, a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, hey, Rafeeq, in 2 weeks, if I were to take another job, you might have to get somebody else for me, and you wouldn't be able to go ahead and have any time to train my replacement, would you? No. What would you like me to do for the next 2 weeks? Just on the fact that maybe okay, and you're talking around the issue, but you haven't really said that. And the last, what's next? I took a look at your website, and you got a training curriculum based on the CISO Mind Map, which looks great, and looks like you're coming up with that as well. And plus, of course, you have your Cybersecurity Learning Saturday on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things, but before I go there, I just want to make sure that saying one thing, there are a number of people who provide their suggestions and their feedback, and I call them contributors. Every year, people have been sending me their ideas. And I do want to acknowledge that although CISO Mind Map started as my thing, but it has become more of a community thing now over the years. And all of the people who have given me suggestions, I'm very thankful to them. And I'm hoping that other people also will continue providing feedback so that we can keep this community resource improved and relevant for everyone. Now, about the training. For a number of years, I have been receiving feedback about, okay, what is next? How we take it to the next level, utilize it in some other ways. And many people have been utilizing in different ways, like for their internal education and awareness session, for product development, for many things. Some of those I mentioned. So I'm very happy that people are using the CISO Mind Map in different ways, and it is helping those people who use it. But personally, I'm very much somebody who wants to contribute and educate and help people go to the next level in their careers. So what I have started doing is taking CISO Mind Map and turning it into a curriculum that people can utilize whichever role they want to pursue in cybersecurity. So more to come about that. I am almost done with the curriculum outline at the first level headings and second level headings. I'm just populating some of the content in it. My focus is that there should be a cybersecurity curriculum which is comprehensive enough, number one, obviously, just like the CISO Mind Map that covers all of those areas. Secondly, some of the deficiencies, for lack of better word, that I see in cybersecurity certifications, I do want to make sure that people know that there is the theory part of it that everybody should know, and there is the practical hands-on part of it. If you only know the theory and you have never run map, for example, you really don't know how to scan open ports. So there's that practical part that people should have along with the theory. And then there is the third part, which is also very important, is how do you communicate with other people, how you explain to them, because many times the role of CISO or any cybersecurity professional is the explainer of technical things in business terms or of technical things in layman terms so everybody can understand. So that communication part is very important. So I'm basically focusing on these three areas: that we should have a theory, we should have a hands-on experience and concept, and then we should have a business acumen, the ability to explain to an enabling business, and so on. So those are the three focus areas that I'm keeping in mind while creating this curriculum. So more to come. I'm very excited about this.
Wonderful. And thank you very much for taking the time to be on CISO Tradecraft. For our listeners or watchers out there, thank you for being part of our show. And if you're not already subscribed, please do. We have a lot of information that'll help you on your security career journey and working your way up to and then maintaining your excellence at the level of a Chief Information Security Officer. So thank you very much for being part of our audience. Rafeeq, again, thank you for your contributions, and I hope to see you again next year. We can go ahead and see the 16th annual version of your mind map. This is your host, G. Mark Hardy, and until next time, stay safe out there.